All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started here today. We have Eric Woodie with us, and my name is Emma Peters. I am the International Market Development Coordinator here at the Illinois Soybean Association. And we're just coming together to give you guys a little bit more of a background and an overview of the recent changes with shipping, with trade, and all things exports. Eric is the ISA trade analyst, and he comes to us with a plethora of background and knowledge from many years of experience in the industry. And so I'll go ahead and turn it over to him to give a little introduction, and then we'll just go ahead and get started through his presentation.
Yeah, thanks for that. I am happy to spend some time talking about trade and some of the trends that we're seeing over the course of the last few months and a little bit before. It definitely seems like there's never a shortage on opportunities to talk through big, important topics. And right now it's definitely no different in that. So I'll start sharing my presentation here and just dig right in.
Perfect.
All right, so like Emma mentioned, and as I did a little bit, we just kind of want to talk about soy from Illinois. I kind of like the way that sounds. It's some of the latest topics that are happening, kind of impacting us directly, and how those different situations are kind of impacting the global marketplace, and the details of those. So I like to spend kind of in most presentations, spending a little bit of time talking about what we do at Illinois, particularly in the marketing and trade teams, what we find ourselves asking, and I know that the ISA staff does, just constantly asking ourselves, what is it that we're doing to positively impact farmers? So that's kind of the key that leads a lot of our work, our decision making on a daily, monthly, weekly basis in order to make sure that what we're doing is truly positively impacting Illinois farmers. So we kind of break that into a couple of different ways, a little bit about the work specifically. We connect directly with buyers, sellers, all those folks that are involved with the overall supply chain. That might be freight providers, transportation providers at a truck level, you name it. As Emma mentioned, I was fortunate to be involved with soy exports for nearly 2 decades. It sounds like a really long time when I say it, but that has benefited us in kind of knowing a lot of who the buyers are, who the sellers are, and ensuring that we into the next sort of category is facilitate actual trade from Illinois. So we wanted to ensure that those connections, we don't want to just assume that they're resulting in trade. We go a step further in kind of providing additional support at a trade level to actually see contracts get done, whether it's through exporters or through buyers. We get to actually see that done through the connections that we've provided, and the support that comes with facilitating could be things like analysis, which is the next category, might just be providing data or charting or just marketing analysis about what's happening in the overall trends of the soy and other spaces, that allows us to keep really consistent, good quality dialogue going with all of the stakeholders, anybody involved with the supply chain. So it also includes a lot of work and efforts on market analysis and reviews for our ISA staff and our board and farmer leaders, and just anyone involved with the supply chain to ensure that we're all prepared to have good discussions and have the details needed in order to make good decisions. At its base, that kind of means we want to be promoting soy from Illinois. We want to be at every turn looking for opportunities for us to push those efforts. Many times that happens through obviously the other three, but trade teams that will come along into Illinois, which we see a lot of on an annual basis. And it feels that we're headed towards a climate where that's going to be a continued need, and there'll be opportunities for success for that moving forward, for sure. So in looking a little bit at the overall global marketplace as it kind of pushes back, and I kind of keep the foundation of this and talking about Illinois specifically, I think it's important to take a look at kind of where we see all that tonnage sort of move. So we figure that about nearly 50 or 60% of these beans produced in Illinois make their way for export. You see a little bit of some variability in that, but on an annual basis, that is a pretty comfortable number. So Illinois is one of the few states that has access to just about every export market, and in a really efficient, competitive way, allowing us to make consistent, good quality soybean meal make its way into these export markets. So the Mississippi River obviously is the biggest driver for that in overall tonnage, in efficiency, making their way to the Illinois River and the Mississippi River, to barge loading locations, and that is the true massive driver for soybean exports, and Illinois is really the biggest leader, I think, in that. So same in the container space. Illinois is the largest container exporting state, encompassing over 30% of what gets exported in containers comes from Illinois. So it's by and far the largest. In many parts of Illinois, in different times of the year, we also see the opportunities for exports into the rail markets, namely into Canada and Mexico. And you've seen a lot of that, increase at certain times and in certain years with different sort of market scenarios that come up. But it's what's really the consistent part of my work is seeing that Illinois really efficiently finds its way into all of these markets. I like to say kind of better than just about anywhere else in the world. So in moving on a little bit into kind of some of the specifics related to soybean exports, I try to find all the good news I can find, but there's a little bit of good news, a little bit of bad news in what we've seen. Here in this chart shows the accumulated soybean exports so far during this marketing year. So that would, encompass the beginning of the marketing year in September through this is mostly April. So if you can kind of see the middle line that kind of stops about halfway, represents where we stand thus far. So we're kind of middle of the pack as it compares to the last 10 marketing years. We're up 12% year on year. As I mentioned, and I will kind of in every presentation I make, we have just a resilient marketplace amidst a lot of geopolitical factors, a lot of shipping and logistical factors that kind of that are pretty easy to find over the course of a decade. Those numbers persist. It is a resilient, strong marketplace for us. So the bad news is, that seasonal impact is really going to kind of show. I think we'll see this line kind of steady, and you won't see marketed moves higher outside of some strange scenarios that would hit our global marketplace. So, and that is kind of two factors involved. That's really truly a seasonal impact where South America becomes far more competitive as they are, pulling beans out of their fields and delivering them directly to market. And the factors kind of impacting us globally. We'll talk a little bit more some of those details as it relates to tariffs and several other factors. So some of the good news in particular, soybean meal has been one of the things that I'm easily happy to share on every presentation I make. We are having just an outstanding time over the last couple of years. This is kind of, it's nice to see the results of a lot of the work that's gone on for all the teams, states, national organizations, and exporters finding their way to really develop these markets in a bigger way. A lot of this has been driven by this huge expansion in soybean crush across the U.S. But I think if we look back a couple of years ago, a lot of folks were pretty concerned about, how are we going to export all this tonnage given the U.S. capacity to load soybeans, soybean meal, corn on an annual basis, and that's happening. Fortunately, I think a lot of the exporters involved and a lot of the farmer leaders involved really spent a lot of time making efforts to put forth and promote soybean meal into these markets, and we're seeing just some outstanding numbers here. This is pretty exciting. So I think we're going to see a record once these last few numbers come in from October to April in the most tons during that period. So far, we're up nearly 20% on the 5-year average. We're also seeing soybean oil at some of the 15-year highs for this early part of that calendar year. So really, again, just some outstanding news. And I'll talk more about some of the destination-related aspects here in just a few. As I mentioned, some of the container markets, Illinois is leader in that. This is kind of a visual breakdown on the total share of container exports by state. You can see Illinois is like I said, leads the way there, going to places like Taiwan, China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and many others. As it develops, I like to always sort of kind of remind people that this container market is such an advantage for us to develop those new markets, places that I would characterize today as Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, some other parts of the world that are in those really true early stages of high and increased demand for proteins, learning how to actually use soybeans, soybean meal in any efficient fashion to really create new markets. So the containers are such a great driver in that to kind of start us off, so that hopefully years into the future we'll see significant increases, potentially bulk tonnage. And if you look back 10, 15, 20 years, some of our biggest markets looked a lot like some of those others do that I mentioned today. So lots of exciting pieces there. The containers, they're a small piece of the total exports, but it's a really outstanding, exciting development that, like I said, Illinois really drives. Okay, this is just the same sort of charts that we looked at for container soybean inspections. This is kind of the process or what we've seen thus far this year. Great year-on-year growth. 4.5% year on year, we're up 20% over the course of the last 5-year average. So some really great numbers here in the container space specifically. And you can see this also relates to or correlates to the soybean bulk exports that we looked at a few charts ago. A lot of this was driven by a high level of demand at really the start of our marketing year, which is a great opportunity for us and has been, which shows really obviously from these charts. A lot of that was driven by absolute needs and demand, and it was also driven by the anticipation of tariffs. I think a lot of countries were expecting tariffs to come through, during the first quarter in Feb and March and beyond. So a lot of destination folks were really pressing to have supplies and increased supplies in a bigger way into a lot of these markets. So opportunity for sure, and you can see that in a lot of these charts. As I mentioned, we're going to kind of get into a little bit of where our customers are. We look at the global marketplace. We can dig down into those specific regions as far as where soybeans are going, where meal's going. This is a great look at the last 5 years of soybean exports from the U.S. So the green line chart shows Chinese tonnage. So essentially, I outlaid the China tonnage with the top 10 markets outside of China. So those are places like Mexico and Indonesia and Egypt and Taiwan and others. And you can see where the largest amounts are going over the course of the last 5 years. So as we move forward, and I'll kind of look into it from this is the same sort of information, just kind of in a percentage visual. So this shows kind of the breakdown of percentages on where soybeans are going. This is last year. So you can see China is critical. There's no way to get around that or think otherwise. China drives the soy markets. But it is really vital. And I think what we have certainly learned over the last 5 years is it is truly vital and critical that we diversify our efforts. We put forth as much effort as is possible to develop other markets, to help create trade opportunities into these markets, because there's expected to be some pretty good growth into some of these. And as I mentioned, kind of as a resilient market, will tend to find these destinations and do it well. So looking forward to seeing this change a little bit in the coming years. We have a really agile logistics and supply chain that can kind of react well to finding these other markets really efficiently. It doesn't necessarily just need these long-term developments. It can happen in a real quick basis. So that'll be some of the work certainly that goes on over the course of the next few years. As I mentioned, some of the excitement from meal exports, this just kind of shows some of the percentage breakdown on a year-on-year basis. I joke still with some colleagues. I used to really rarely even pull meal export charts because up until the last couple of years, they really just didn't change much. So, you know, I'm always looking for some differences in data and things to really look at closely. The soybean meal export market didn't really provide much of that over the course of the last decade, and that's really truly changed in the last few years. Again, with the expansion of crush in the U.S., you are seeing some really great developments in a lot of these markets, places where we have relied on over the course of the last few decades, the Philippines and Mexico and Canada. Well, those are just incredible year-on-year increases, 20% and 15%. We're also seeing some really new markets come online here that we didn't truly have the supplies set up well enough to be able to provide them consistent, reliable exports. So they have relied on, you know, other countries to do so. So Vietnam's a great example with 80% increase year on year. I think you're going to see that really continue to change in places like Vietnam and others in Southeast Asia, Indonesia in particular, that has really relied heavily on soybean meal from South America. Again, mostly due to some efficiencies in the overall supply chain there that have existed, but for the U.S., we just couldn't truly foster those markets at a high level to consistently bring in product needed for a lot of the end users there. And that has changed. That has certainly flipped on its face, and a lot of the work that we'll do and counterparties will do and those related will be spending a great deal of time on these efforts. And this is, again, real marketing and development that we're going to see into these markets. Some of our farmer leaders and our staff are headed to Indonesia, I think, here pretty soon. So that is going to provide real face-to-face opportunities for just some outstanding discussions about some of those expected, you know, opportunities and changes that we'll see coming. So really timely there. I'm very excited to hear what we learn and there's always good news in what we're searching for in some of these markets. So just a quick, I pulled this from the folks over at USEC. This is just an outstanding visual on overall soy markets and where they're going from the US. So this lists the top 15 soy markets. This is a total complex that shows beans, meal, oil in its totals. So it's just a really neat way to look at this. Soybeans make up about 46.1 million metric tons, soybean meal, a little over 14 million metric tons, and soy oil more even beyond that. So this I'm a really visual sort of explainer. So this really shows well what we're seeing into these markets. A lot of the work that gets done and where some of the opportunities lay kind of moving forward, assuming for the good opportunities. So in looking at what we talk about a lot of times, as I mentioned, what we're doing in order to really foster a lot of the work that we're doing for these efforts to impact our soy farmers. One of the recent opportunities for us was the Mediterranean Shipping Company, MSC as they're mostly known, had a big sort of collaborative celebration for celebrating their 40th year of calling U.S. ports. They are the largest container shipper in the world, so that they really drive a lot of our container markets and have a really close understanding of the ag market, as well as obviously those others that all sort of relate. So I was able to meet with it seemed like just about every major U.S. soy exporters and talk through, and we'll talk about them in a minute, some of the trends that are impacting us, that really helps us focus on, where our efforts should be into current markets, what they think forward opportunities will be, and really determining smart ways for us to collaborate and combine efforts, and hopefully relay that information to our farmer leaders so that they can make good decisions on what's next, because it's an ever-changing landscape in these markets. So this provided a really outstanding opportunity to sit down in a large scale sort of forum and chat with not only exporters but importers and what they're seeing as the total impacts. So just a really outstanding opportunity to do that. I wanted to just highlight, and Emma has suggested kind of pass it along. So it was a great time for us. Okay, and what I think we wanted to really spend some time talking about was kind of what's next, what we're going to see for trends, in as much as we can sort of predict in this ever-changing kind of landscape. I try to make that into a couple of main topics. What this outlays is this is some data provided to us by Pro Exporter, who's just an outstanding group who does a lot of economic research. The top and most interesting, I think, what questions we might look at is where's domestic production going to go? They're expecting over the course of the next 10 years that we would see it increase by about 12%, up to 4.7 billion bushels. We talked about it in a pretty healthy way already, but U.S. crush is continued to expected to increase similarly at about 12%. Making for a record of 2.69 billion bushels getting crushed in the U.S. So I think a lot of folks who are kind of have their finger on these markets and are close to them would probably question, some of the economics have certainly changed in the U.S. crush markets over the last couple of years. And we saw, probably 2 years ago where the expectation was probably at higher levels in some of these facilities, more likely to come online. The expectation is, for the most part, by and large, we are going to continue to see the anticipated expansion happen in a similar fashion to what we were seeing. So outside of some changes in very specifically to the biodiesel space, the expectation is that we will see crush increase in a big way. And some of that is obviously already showing in some of the data, particularly as it relates to soybean meal and soybean oil. Lastly, the expectation is that we would see whole bean exports remain at a pretty similar level. Again, I think year on year, we'll see some variability in that depending on lots of factors in Mother Nature, geopolitical, you name it, lots of just base economic factors that will drive this overall supply and demand. So I think we'll see that vary. Certainly. The one that we can kind of really depend on is soybean meal exports being up in a really significant way, as much as 26% over the course of the next 10 years, which is, again, where a lot of these efforts have been being made. And I think we're going to see many more opportunities for other countries to be, true partners for us as it relates to soybean meal in particular.
Yeah, Eric, before you move on, that's just one place I wanted to interject on is this last slide, where we are hoping to really see that growing in domestic production and growing in exports or growth in exports. You mentioned previously some of those markets you were excited about as far as growth and market development. How do you think that they're going to play into that? Do you think that looks like China growing their demand, or do you think that a lot of those exports are going to come from those new developing markets? And can you just again elaborate a little bit more about why you're excited about those markets and which ones?
Totally. It's a great question. I think it kind of, as I mentioned, I think China has to continue to be someone who we foster constant good trade relations with, particularly as it relates to, or specifically as it relates to soybeans, agriculture. It is one that we depend on in such a high level. We've had so many years where that was just an outstanding, very positive, great growth scenarios. I think we're, just based on simple ideas on where we're going with our current administration and what we're seeing globally is we're going to see a little bit of volatility there. We're seeing that a little bit already on the Chinese side. But again, always sort of looking for a positive outlook. China will be there year in and year out. They are, there's always thoughts or concerns as to whether they would start producing at high levels. And I just don't see that making a significant impact in the markets. So China will drive our efforts, certainly. And you're seeing it both in our group and in some of the national groups, and making true efforts and looking how that can diversify. The soybean meal expansion has pushed us in a direction that has really just forced that and created the really outstanding opportunity to supply these markets where we couldn't before. So really exciting stuff. I think we're just getting started with a lot of those countries that I mentioned in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and then those other really early developing markets that looked a lot like Vietnam and Indonesia 20 years ago. Places like Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and a few others in that region, I think will provide us with these new opportunities for true exciting growth when you look at it, in the course of the next decade, right? So it'll be incremental growth, percentage basis, where, 10 years from now, we look at it and go, we got that right. This is going well. So there's the benefit is we have so much expertise now, and our logistics are so efficient to get into these markets and do it well, that every country has differences as it relates to geopolitically and their currencies. But once those things sort of solidify, I mention it all the time too, a lot of these markets have really just over the course of the last 18 months kind of crawled their way back from the economic impacts of COVID. where, we were fortunate to do that in a faster way. A lot of these markets that don't have the economic systems that we do and the GDP and the growth and all those aspects, they're just getting back to that. So their true demand and those numbers that we saw prior to COVID are coming through, as well as newer developing increases across the world. We're seeing substantial increases in protein demand, and there are markets where that's really at its kind of, or in truly the early stages. So as we look at kind of a couple of those, let's say, headwinds, opportunities, those have really driven a lot of the news cycles over the past kind of 9 months, 12 months, and probably a bit more. We've mentioned it a few times, but the Section 301 remedies, our administration put forth a new regulation that is essentially attempting to push and create U.S. shipping, doing and managing most of the exports. And essentially, our administration wants it to be American vessels driving our soybeans and other products away from the country, in and away from the country. So that doesn't happen to a great deal of the extent. We just haven't been a shipbuilding country for quite a long time. But so the two scenarios here for that would be bulk impact and container impacts. The bulk vessel trade lanes, and in talking to a lot of the exporters, a lot of those really closely involved with this change, feel like the current bulk trade lane is sort of safe in what they have, and the ships that are coming here and the ships that are able to come here and make their way into trade lanes provide sort of a soft landing from an economic standpoint. There's not a huge impact. It's one that they can kind of absorb and move through it. And I guess the true concern would have been is, what if there aren't enough ships to export these products? I think we're safe in that, saying that that's not the case. So that's the good news there. On the container side, it's a little more gray. It's not quite as simplified as far as this regulation is coming forth, and it continues to change a bit. So it will be more costly if things proceed as they are. It'll cost more to ship containers. For a container ship to call the U.S. will just increase freight costs. So in talking to MSC and those folks when I was at their event a few weeks ago, that was a huge topic and is something that they're working on, creating kind of the best trade landscape for all those counterparties, both importers and exporters, to hopefully reduce those costs and create continued competitive exports. The other couple that we had mentioned, certainly over the course of the last year, is the situation with EUDR, so the European Union deforest regulation. That amazingly is in another sort of changing and rumored scenarios, but it appears that the sort of chairman and the administration who the committee who oversees this has changed a bit in overall personnel. They are it would seem that there is a potential for this to get extended even beyond December later this year. So there will certainly be some more developments that we'll learn over the course of the next few months. But as we have mentioned kind of in the past and see, this is still a pretty great opportunity for the U.S. to potentially create an advantage a little bit into the European market, being able to satisfy this potential new requirement. So positive news there, but there's also a bit of some of the changing landscape a little bit with some of the folks involved. Indonesia, we've definitely talked about, and it is one that seems to be a little more of a growing concern. This is one of those that I hate to sort of call them as one of our best markets, and it's got to be so specific, but Indonesia has just been such an incredible market for Illinois. mostly driven by the fact that they require high quality soybeans delivered to them in a competitive way. So that means we can do that well in both bulk and containers. Kind of different parts of the country don't have that opportunity. So it's also a very big container market. So there's a new regulation that's impacting the container shippers that is trying to sort of require a specific window of 21 days from when a box is observed by the USDA or APHIS and when it arrives into Indonesia. And it's impacting the overall logistics in a way that that is pretty concerning. So it is a new regulation, and I think it wasn't quite specifically considered to kick out potential soybean imports, but I think it is showing the potential for that to happen for until this kind of gets figured out in a very specific way, that we very well may see less soy making its way into Indonesia in the near term until kind of some of this regulation is managed in a different way. So tariffs have kind of always driven, they've truly driven the news cycle for the last few months. You know, anytime you have, 80-year-old grandmas at the grocery store talking about tariffs, you know that it's really impacting everyone and it's a true topic on everybody's mind. So it is one where it's just on a daily basis, it feels like, well, things are changing. Might have got some new news today, and it'll be one that our team, me and the rest of the team will certainly be working closely with to have a good understanding of those changes and the impacts. What we can certainly say is that there's a healthy amount of uncertainty that we'll have to really be prepared for, discuss a lot with our counterparties, as well as kind of all those supply in the supply chain. So I mentioned it in a healthy way. Domestic crush is expected to increase substantially again over the next 5 years. So that's I probably over talked that a little bit, but it's one of the more, again, Emma, as you mentioned, it's one of the more exciting developments that we're seeing moving forward. That I think we can put a lot of effort into and learn a good deal about and making our push to promote as much as we can into some of these new markets. So that's all I had. I'm happy to be providing this good information. We talk about it all the time, timely, useful information. And I think this is a great idea to put together kind of really topical discussions about what's happening in our soy market. So I appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Eric, and I think that what we could see in the last slide for sure is that so much of that is up in the air, so much is unknown, and so we just have to kind of take those punches as they come to us and be ready to respond as we can. But I think a lot of it, you especially have given us a lot of great information. There's constantly new headlines coming at us as well, but again, we've just got to, as an industry, sit back and be prepared for anything that comes our way. Yeah, definitely. It's a great point. Yeah. I think I personally have one question for you that might just apply to our entire audience. Obviously, this is a recorded webinar, so we can't take questions right away, but through our email, we will open it up and allow people to submit, and we'll follow up with those questions as they come in. But one question I just want to address as a whole for our audience, whether that's a farmer in the field or whether that's a buyer around the world, I think a lot of people are wanting to know, how can we combat these major policy changes? How can a farmer combat these issues, or how are we going to react when there's so much unknown and so much is constantly changing? What can we do to best prepare ourselves? Yeah, it's such a great question. It couldn't be more timely. I think, if we look back over the course of the last decade, there's always these opportunistic kind of situations. I think this is one that is just glaring. As far as there's plenty of policy driven aspects to a lot of this, what I would tell, anyone,
farmer leaders, those, and I know the exporters are doing a lot of this work, particularly with like some of this 301 shipping remedies. These are policy driven, these are can go back to our legislators and have some discussions and make them aware of those impacts. I'm a true believer in that, and some of these scenarios really provide that opportunity. So the other I think is really truly getting into the weeds with a lot of these. A lot of times, I think Illinois is such that we tend to live in the anyway because we are such a big part of the export market, and I would say that our farmer leaders know more about the export markets when compared to other areas of the country, and it's just we've done such a good job of combining that. Their thirst and interest in that information is so consistent and strong, for a great reason. This is a huge part of the soybean complex, and their opportunities to essentially make more money for them, right? That's what we're after. We're hoping to bring every cent we can back to the farmers. So there are certainly opportunities in this. And I think what we'll have to do is be in the weeds. We have to understand what these things mean, how these tariffs are going to impact us, and what efforts we can make moving forward. It will vary substantially on, where our efforts are going, whether it's by country or, by some policy related aspect. They're there. They're staring us in the face, and that will continue to change. I think we can pretty confidently say at this point that we will see continued consistent changes in this global U.S. trade marketplace in a really big way. So us understanding that will, I think, be crucial for us to make great decisions moving forward, because I think what we thought 2 years ago and looking where we'd be today, probably we got some things right. Probably some things are a bit more unexpected. It's important for us to look, over the course of the next 3 to 5 years and be really at the forefront of these conversations and being involved. Like our farmer leaders, they drive this market. They drive this country in a lot of ways. So understanding these and allowing ISA staff and hopefully myself to help with that and provide support in that and doing that together, I think is a true way we can impact it positively going forward. So no shortage of opportunities out there in the current marketplace.
No, for sure. And really want to thank you for hopping on here and just giving us so much information. I think this is all really valuable to anyone that's out there listening, and we hope to have you back. And obviously, we're going to utilize you for many more of these emails to come. You just have so much. Yeah, you just have so much knowledge that we really appreciate having you on here and doing this sort of thing. So
well, that's great. I hope that the audience for this really kind of reaches out, and this is the sort of stuff that I think we all do. Our staff and me kind of like talking through. This is kind of some of the better parts of some of the stuff we get to do. So I look forward to those conversations.
For sure. Well, thank you so much.